Jayde Riviere has extended her contract at Manchester United. As you can see, me and Cerys are really happy with this one because to play a first of hopefully a couple of contract extensions we're going to see over the coming weeks/months. Because there's been a bit of concern around the fan base, around contracts and things like that. So, Cerys, let's just have a quick chat about Jayde then, because a player that we were getting a little bit worried about. Obviously, her contract up this summer. She did have the option, so there was that in there as well. But just your initial thoughts that we've seen this afternoon that she's signed for 3 more years.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think Jayde's a player that I have always felt has been massively underrated for us. I think she's one of the first, whenever she's injured, which if I was to make one criticism of her, which is not in any way her fault, is that she picks up a lot of injuries. Like when she's injured, you notice. Even if you don't specifically go, oh, that's Jayde, you will notice that the defence is weaker, that teams target her side when she's not there. I think she's a player that, even if fans don't necessarily always pick up on how important she is, I think opponents definitely do. So to have her tied down to a long-term deal is really good, because I think it was only a matter of time before other big clubs came knocking, and to have her sort of committing to that until 2028 as well, it feels like quite a big year in the club's ideology at the moment. This is allegedly when we want to win the WSL, win the Premier League, by all this sort of thing. So to have her tied down till that sort of milestone year, it feels, without being too optimistic, like the club are trying to put things in place to get us to that point. So having that long-term deal signed, I think, is a massive positive.
Yeah, and I think as well, like obviously Mela Tissier is also 2028 as well. Jayde has also got an option in this contract, so essentially it's 3+1, so that would take it to 29 should the club obviously exercise the option when we get to 2028 at that particular time. But I think for me it's just massively important. I think it shows a bit of, as I said at the start, there's obviously a lot of concern, around contracts and where the club's going at the moment in the general direction. But I feel like this is a big not a statement as such, because I think once we get maybe like a Grace Clinton contract or something like that, that will obviously appease a lot of fans a lot more, I feel like.
Yeah, I think, she's not the flashiest player necessarily, and she's not the biggest name in the squad. For instance, like we saw the amount, it's only really with a player like Grace Clinton that you would hear contract extension and people would be annoyed that it wasn't a longer contract, rather than happy that she signed or that we've triggered an option. But I think, yeah, it's a positive step. And I think the more players, what's really important to me is that players are happy at United enough to sign a deal of that length, because even if, the team's not exactly where you want it to be, the results aren't always exactly what you want to be happy enough in the environment to sign a 3+1 year deal is, to me, a really positive sign.
No, absolutely. I think just a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, because as people know, I teased this a little bit in my cutback article that a contract was potentially coming. I think from my understanding with it, and obviously I think we've seen this obviously with Grace Clinton having her option triggered for another year. A lot of this is obviously to stop other clubs, I guess, speaking to the players being in the latter stage of their contract length. That is then possible. This obviously stops that when they've signed a new contract or an option is triggered. And I think hearing some of the names that were getting banded about that were potentially interested in Jayde, I'm really happy that she's committed here, because, some of the I guess the bigger now, I think that just shows the quality of her, the fact that she has had interest, before she even came to United, she's had interest while she's at United, and I think that shows the level of player we're talking about here. It may not be the big lioness name or the flashiest kind of player, but I agree with you. I think, we're a much better team when she's playing on that right hand side, and to have her locked in until 2028, Mela Tissier alongside her, that's our right side of defence locked in long term. Jayde's got age on her side, still really young as well. So a lot of room to improve. How good do you think this makes, or how much better? Because I say this a lot on these shows, that for me, she's a better player. We're a better team when she plays. Firstly, do you agree with that? But also, if you do agree, why do you think that is?
I think it's a lot of things. One thing that Mark Skinner used to talk about a lot is balance in the defence, like actually having a left-footed left back and a right-footed right back. There's that very obvious kind of point. I think she brings just I'm never especially worried when I see her in a 1v1. Like, I think she's very reliable, very trustworthy in those situations. She can make those sort of like Aaron Wan-Bissaka-esque, like Elastigirl tackles when you think like, how the hell has she reached that? Which is a quality I really love in defenders, those big sliding tackles where you think, I wouldn't want anyone else doing that, but because it's you, I trust you. Yeah, I think we're a better team from a defensive point of view. She's a very like solid kind of partner on that right hand side to Maya as well. And you're right, having the two of them locked in as a partnership makes me feel like so much better. Like it's just that nice little security at the back. But then also, I think she adds a lot going forward. Obviously, she had kind of massive shoes to fill, like stepping into the gap that Honor left, who was, I think, undoubtedly at the time, arguably still is one of the best fullbacks in the world, if not the best. So she had massive shoes to fill, and I actually think she's done an exceptional job. I think going forward, her sort of, I've seen a lot more from her this season of her having that confidence to go forward, to get involved in the forward play, like linking up with occasionally when we've seen Clinton in the sort of right midfield. I've liked what I've seen in the link up there. When Bizzett's played right wing as well, I've enjoyed kind of what I've seen there. I think she's adding a lot more to her attacking game, and especially with like Anna Sandberg coming in, that sort of use of more attacking fullbacks is something that I find really like intriguing, and I think it just adds an extra little dynamic threat to our attack. So I think she makes us strong, not only stronger in defence, but I think stronger going forward as well.
No, I agree, and I think the one hope I've got for her is she can have a consistent run of games. It's you've already mentioned it, and we spoke about it. Her injuries, it's nothing down to her. I think it's just one of those players who's really unfortunate when it comes to those injuries. I hope she can have a consistent run this season, and really push on and build some partnerships on the right hand side. Her and Jace, I think, link up very well on the right hand side. Obviously, Clinton, when she's drifting out there, as you've mentioned, I think works really well. And I think from an attacking point of view, as you've mentioned, her defensive qualities are brilliant. She's not afraid to get stuck in, which I really like. But going forward, she offers us a lot. I mean, the game against West Brom, for example, she put 4 or 5 brilliant crosses in the first half, and you're almost looking at like, we spoke on the end of year show that she hadn't had any kind of assists or goals or anything like that. But I think not a lot of that is down to her. I don't think the amount of good crosses she puts into the box, I'm almost just like, how is nobody finishing some of these? Like, that's a striker's dream, some of these crosses. So I think once we get on, once she gets on maybe some of the same wavelength with some of the forwards and that kind of thing, I think we will start seeing the numbers back up what we're all seeing with our own eyes, which is a very good fullback. And I think when you're looking at it from a future point of view, you've got her, Anna Sandberg on the left-hand side, kind of building that blocks for the future from a backline point of view, in terms of that young team that Mark Skinner obviously speaks about as well in press conferences and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point as well, is she's only 23. Like, she's got so much time to develop. And I think even thinking back to the Champions League game against PSG at Lille last season, I remember like watching her against, oh God, I can't remember who it was now, their winger anyway. It was a really tough game for her. And she was pretty like new in the team at that point. And I remember like every break in play, she was being called over to the dugout to be like given instructions on her positioning, like everything that she was doing. And I think just thinking about the amount that she has developed since then, she's come so far in like no time at all, in like a season basically. So I think it's really positive to see that she thinks she can keep that development going here, because I think that's a criticism people have sometimes had, is that we seem to sometimes be a bit of a launch pad for clubs. Like, I mean, Lauren James is a bit of an exception, because I think it was always pretty inevitable that she would go back to Chelsea if the opportunity came up. But she's sort of an example of, are we just a place where young players go to develop, and then as they feel they need that extra step of development to hit their peak, they go off somewhere else in the Women's Super League? It's boosts my confidence to see players of Jayde's sort of age, like at that stage in their career, thinking that United is actually a place where they want to be.
I think that's a really important point you make, and I think that's why I said at the start that with the teams that were potentially interested in her and things like that, that the fact that she wants to stay here, I think, is a good sign. I want to come back to maybe what this means for the rest of the contracts and things like that. Whether you think this is a bit of a boost from their point of view as well, but I just think for her, that PSG game that you mentioned, it was quite sad actually, because a lot of people were kind of writing her off after that as almost just like, oh, she's not on her, she's not very good. And I'm also like, for a start in the first leg, she was playing out of position anyway, playing in right wing. And I think she got pulled at half time actually in that one, because that system really didn't work for her or for the team. And like you said, you're coming up against a PSG team in our first Champions League out, and I think it was Karshawi on the left and Chawinga, I think it was on the left-hand side against her, and it's just like she was getting doubled up on all over the place. And I felt really sorry for her, because I said after that game, people were writing her off already, and I'm like, there's such a good player in there. We're just yet to see it on a consistent basis. And I think now fans are starting to appreciate the player that we've always known really is in there, week in, week out on the right-hand side. And I think just having that defensive stability, I know this isn't Jayde's position, but a lot of talk has been about the left centre-back and who should start left-back and things like that. But we know, really, when a team's fully fit, it's going to be Maya and Jayde as the right centre-back and right-back. And I think that's a really good, strong position to be in, that we've got players that are committed to the club longer term, but also we know when they're fit, they are the starters and very consistent performers as well for the team. In terms of contracts and things like that, do you think this will add a boost to other players that are thinking of signing extensions and things like that? We've seen some of the reaction online. Players, Melvin and Simi obviously are really close with Jayde in particular, seeing their reaction, but Leah and Evie and a lot of the players obviously congratulating Jayde and really happy that she's staying. Do you think some of those other players will look at that? Not just players that are out of contract this year. There's contract negotiations for players that are out of contract next summer as well, that are maybe thinking of committing longer term. I
would hope so. Yeah, I think it comes back to the point we've just been discussing about her being at sort of this pivotal development stage. It's a big, and I hope the club can repay it for her. It is a big move of trust to commit to that length of a contract when you're 23. It's such she's effectively signed on for the peak years of her career. So I think that's a massive move of trust in the club, which is I'm really glad to see her take, and I really hope that it gets repaid. And I hope that will she seems like quite a good figure in the squad, obviously not to the extent of sort of a Mayer or a Tooney, but I think she does have that sort of trusted voice. I think that's another development I've noticed in her game as well, being much more vocal and much more confident in sort of talking to other players about positioning, organising the line, and so on. I think hopefully her making that step to commit these next few years to United will lead other players to do the same. I mean, in terms of this summer, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the only one we've actually got coming up is Millie Turner, which I would be both surprised and heartbroken if that doesn't get to a new deal. But like you say, we've got quite a few coming up next summer. So what would be really nice now is if we can deal with some of the players whose contracts are coming up in the summer of 2026 before January of 2026. Because I just don't want another 2023 where it felt like you were watching, this is a really dramatic way of putting it, but it felt like you were watching a car crash in slow motion and there was just nothing you could do to stop it, where the time was just ticking down and you were like, they're all going to leave on free transfers. I really don't want another of those situations again. So I hope that this sort of adds to the impetus for those other players to think about their futures as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, in terms of this summer, obviously, Millie, as already mentioned, obviously Rachel Williams as well, I think, because her option was triggered from last summer. I believe Aoife Mannion, but again, I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that one. I think there's a couple of youngsters as well, but we'll come back to that when it's closer to the time, because I think they're a little bit undisclosed with some of them. So we'll wait and see. But I do know for 2026, there's a lot of players that are out that are currently obviously mid negotiations. So it's good that the club are thinking ahead and trying to get these planned.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Grace Clinton's extension now will run until that year. I believe is Tooney's contract up in 2026 as well.
Tooney,
so there's a lot of really important players that we really need to get thinking about early and not leave the contract negotiations until last minute. Because I think the other thing is these players are starting to really know their value, as they should, and it shouldn't be a case of, I think United, unfortunately, at the moment, I think we're finding this on the men's side as well. There was once a time where you could just say, don't you want to play for Manchester United? And especially on the men's side, it would be yeah, of course. I don't think I hope we get back to that point, but I don't think we're at that point right now. The club badge on its own I don't think carries as much pull as it maybe used to, which is something that we can only address by making the players who are at the club happy, so that it becomes like known as a good place to be and a good place to develop. So, and part of that is making those players who are here feel valued by not rushing negotiations, by, you know, being sensible about future planning. So that's something that I really hope that we kind of see going into next season.
No, absolutely, and I will give my kind of final thought on it really before we wrap this one up is obviously that Jayde is extended without needing an option. You know, she got it done early. You know, she could have had the option triggered for the summer, and we could have had another Grace situation where we're waiting. And also, I throw back to this a lot that, you know, she signed this wanting to stay at the club for 3, maybe 4 years, depending on that option when we get there, without even knowing what the potential manager situation is going to be next year. So she is purely signed because she loves the club, wants to be here, and obviously she believes that this is the best place for her development. So I think that is a big indicator in terms of the rest of the club, hopefully moving forward with some of the other younger players that are maybe coming to the end of their contract, some of those other new signings as well that are potentially looking to come through the door as well, that this maybe is a place that players are committing their longer future to. And it's nice to see we're actually getting longer contracts as well. You know, the kind of 3, the 4 year kind of bracket, not this kind of 1 and 2 year. Albeit, I know Grace's was a 1 year option, but we're seeing a bit more of that longer stretch of contract there.
Yeah, I think that's been a real issue in women's football, is that so many of the contracts are so much shorter than we've been used to seeing in the men's game. And it's nice to see that shift, both in terms of security for fans, obviously, and stability for fans and having that bit of reassurance. But I do think like it's important for players as well. Like, you want that security that you have. Like, we need to remember at the end of the day, obviously a lot of female footballers are very well paid, but it's not to the same degree as a lot of the male footballers by any stretch. Like, that actual job security is really important. So I think it's a positive step, like in the game, in the women's game as a whole, that we're seeing that shift a little bit.
No, absolutely, 100% agree on that one. So, yeah, we're both really happy, as I'm sure everyone is, with the news that Jayde Riviere has signed till 2028, and the first of hopefully a couple of contract extensions coming our way over the coming months or so. So, Jayde, if you're watching this, we're really happy that you've signed. I don't know whether you will or not, but there we go. We're happy. We're going to round it off there. Make sure you're liking this video and subscribing if you haven't already. We should see you guys in the next video.